Okay, before we dig into this book, I want to tell you a little story. Cast your mind back a few years to 2017. Okay, you there? Wow, look. Contactless payment. That's good, isn't it? In 2017, I was living in Bristol. Great city, full of happy queers and angry activists. But it wasn't perfect, because while I lived in Bristol, I was friends with a guy who had an incredible talent for gaslighting. He made gaslighting look like an art form. But he was also very insecure, and being friends with someone who's as much of a book fanatic as I am, he felt that he needed to read more. And so for that year, he slowly made his way through Annihilation by Jeff VanderMeer, which he randomly found in Waterstones, and I didn't want to read it, because he was reading it, and the idea of reading it just left a sour taste in my mouth, so I didn't. But then I found out that the film adaptation of Annihilation was made by Alex Garland. And Garland is an interesting guy. He wrote the novel The Beach, which Danny Boyle based his film off, and then he worked with Danny Boyle writing a bunch of screenplays for things like 28 Days Later before becoming a film director himself. He directed Ex Machina, which I thought was a great film. Last year he directed Men, which in concept was brilliant, like a really, really cool idea. In execution, an absolute mess. A really, really ultimately bad film because of its execution. It felt really derivative of Ari Aster's films, and the execution was just so sloppy and sad. But in concept, Men is a good idea for a film, it just didn't work. But Annihilation is a decent film. So I thought, right, I'm finally gonna read the novel. Finally. So, Annihilation is the first novel in a trilogy called The Southern Reach by Jeff VanderMeer. It's a really short book. It actually comes in just under 200 pages, which is a really nice length for a trippy, strange sci-fi novel, and I actually think that its length really works in its favour because something this Lovecraftian and bizarre and fever dreamish shouldn't outstay its welcome. And so clocking in at just under 200 pages is really ideal for a novel of this style. I appreciate Jeff VanderMeer for not dragging it out unnecessarily, which some authors might have the urge to do. When you first open up the book, there are so many accolades from authors and magazines, newspapers, both online and in print. It goes on and on and on. But I do want to quickly draw your attention to a review that instantly made me angry. I literally went from smiling to frowning in a finger snap. I was angry so quickly at the pretentiousness and the arrogance of this review from Neil Mukherjee of New Statesman, which says, "I hope the trilogy will come to be seen not only as the instant sci-fi classic it is, but also as capital L literature." Oh, fuck off. Oh, how dare we think of science fiction as literature? Maybe sci-fi could be seen as a high art form. Fucking hell. Ugh, I'm angry all over again. So anyway, what's it about? Annihilation follows an unnamed protagonist. She's simply called the Biologist, and she is part of a team of 4 women who make up the 12th expedition into an area called Area X. Area X sits somewhere in the United States. It's an area of forests and swamps and marshes that leads to the ocean. Inside Area X, you've got an abandoned town, an abandoned lighthouse, and a strange tower or tunnel that seems to have appeared as if from nowhere and burrows down into the earth. The origins of Area X, why it's abandoned, what went wrong, what's dangerous about it, that's all left a mystery for the most part. The shady government agency that gives the trilogy its title, The Southern Reach, simply say that there was some sort of ecological disaster. And now Area X is an abandoned place. When people go in, strange things happen. Sometimes they don't come out. In fact, the blurb says it. One has ended in mass suicide, another in a hail of gunfire, the 11th in a fatal cancer epidemic. Actually, speaking of the blurb, I really like what this book does with its blurb. Most blurbs, you know their function. They set the scene, they might give away the first few chapters of a book. This is different, actually. This is more like the crawl at the start of a Star Wars film. The blurb purely exists as a little bit of exposition to just tell you what Area X is. It doesn't tell you what happens in the novel, it doesn't tell you about the characters, it just sets the scene. it's a Star Wars crawl, and I'm really impressed by that choice to make the blurb function slightly differently to how a blurb normally works, but only slightly. So these 4 women each have different jobs and different roles within the expedition. They're going to go into Area X, try and figure it out, investigate it. That's all we really know. There's a strange area where weird things happen. People do not live there anymore, and periodically groups are sent in there to have a wander. Our protagonist is the biologist. You've also got the surveyor, the psychologist, and the other one I can't remember. Anthropologist. The anthropologist, who disappears really, really early on. So 4 then become 3. As I said, there are no names, only job titles. As we progress, we learn a little bit more about our protagonist. We learn a bit more about her personality, her past, the fact that she had a husband. The film gives away pretty early, as far as I remember, the fact that her husband was actually part of the 11th expedition. But we learn that in the novel a little bit later. The novel doesn't spend a lot of time teasing things to us. I told you that there's this mysterious tower/tunnel that burrows into the earth, and we go there really, really soon. When we get there, the biologist notices that there's some weird writing on the walls. It is a tower that spirals down into the earth, and there are stairs that you can just walk all the way down, and they lead to somewhere. And so they walk a little ways into the tower, and they notice writing on the walls. The writing is biblical-sounding gibberish, and it's made of moss and flowers and living things. And the biologist is trying to read it when suddenly one of the flowers sort of opens up and some spores explode out of it that she breathes in. We then find out soon after that the psychologist is able to hypnotize them and attempts to hypnotize them all, and she is now immune to hypnotism, presumably because of the spores. And then we learn that the writing on the walls was created by some strange, possibly extraterrestrial creature that roams Area X, and it's writing this organic stuff on the walls, and they call it the Crawler. So as we dig deeper into Area X, things get stranger and stranger, and I haven't told you half of it, and I don't want to. Everything I've told you is revealed pretty early on. So mystery area, nameless protagonist, exploring it, things get more feverish and strange as it goes. I think I already mentioned that there's a certain Lovecraftian element to this, and that's very true. The idea that things are bigger than us. Area X is unknowable. The people who are exploring it are in over their heads. Is it possible to really understand what this place is, what it does, how it came to be, who or what the Crawler is? And things only get stranger the deeper into the novel you go. And you find yourself reading more quickly, tearing through it. But then you stop and go, hang on, what is happening here? Then maybe you have to go back because things get so strange, so surreal, they don't make sense. You think, surely I've tripped over something here. Surely I missed a page or a paragraph, something. So you go back. Maybe you did. Maybe you were reading too quickly. And so you slow down, you rewind, you go again. Maybe this helps you make more sense of it. Maybe it doesn't. This is all obviously my actual experience reading Annihilation. And then we come to what the book is supposed to be about. If you read the stories of H.P. Lovecraft, they don't really make sense. They don't necessarily have a deeper thematic meaning. Obviously, what we all think about these days is the fact that he was a horrible, horrible racist. But his books were cosmic horror. The idea that there are unknowable, impossible things bigger than us that we can't understand, and if we try to understand them, we literally go insane. And that's kind of what Annihilation is doing. But I think Annihilation has a much deeper meaning. My interpretation, and I haven't Googled it, this might be the interpretation, it might be what everyone agrees on, but Area X hit me as a place unknowable from our perspective, but it's also kind of utopian. Life is flourishing there, but all of that life is not human. And there's also a strange humanoid creature doing things that don't make sense to us, or at least not fully. And it made me think about what it must be like. And I think about this quite a lot. What does the world look like to our pets? What does a city look like to pigeons and squirrels that live in it? It made me think about the way that humanity has dug up and repurposed and destroyed its environment. But there are creatures all around us trying to adapt to a humanized, anthropologized world. Everything we do to the world affects it, but the world is full of stuff that has to go on living in it. So when a dog walks on a pavement, what does that feel like? Are they aware that that's not natural? When I see a pigeon in London, I sometimes think to myself, does the pigeon know that the air here isn't clean? That it's full of pollution? Do they know? And that's kind of how I felt reading Annihilation, the idea that the humans are in an area that doesn't make sense to them. They can figure out some things, they can recognize some aspects to it, they can read the writing on the wall, literally, but it doesn't make sense to them. That kind of felt like an on-the-nose metaphor for what everything in this world that isn't human feels about and reacts to the humanization of the world. And when I started thinking that way, Annihilation became a kind of eco-novel. Area X represents the human world from the perspective of other creatures that have to live in it and do their best to survive in it and make sense of it and adapt to it, if possible. The fact that previous expeditions have ended in disaster, people getting sick, turning on each other, going insane. When you think about animals that live in rainforests that are being destroyed and their reaction to that destruction as a way to try to survive, or even adapt if possible, that was the connection I made. That's where my mind went. I might be stupid, I might be very wrong, I don't know. And maybe there is no greater meaning, maybe this is just Jeff VanderMeer doing a Lovecraftian thing. And if that's it, he succeeded. But if my interpretation of this book is accurate in any way, cool. It doesn't really matter either way. And now I'm in a curious position where I could read the second and third books in the trilogy, but part of me doesn't want to because the air of mystery that remains when the book closes is something I kind of want to hold on to. If the mystery gets solved, if things get revealed, if we learn more about the Crawler and Area X, am I going to be disappointed? Because a mystery stops being a mystery once it's solved, and I kind of like the ambiguity of the whole thing. I probably am going to read the next one though. Like, how could I not? So, what's so great about Annihilation? It manages to take Lovecraftian elements and turn them into something that I interpreted as eco-themed, exploring the ways in which humanity is destroying the world and forcing everything else to adapt or fail to and therefore die. I also just really like the way that it's told. The fact that as the novel goes on, it gets away from you. A few days ago, I went jogging, and I was running down a bit of pavement with really uneven paving slabs, and I tripped and I fell, and I felt like I was falling for like 5 minutes. If you've ever done that, where you've been running and then you trip, and the momentum that you built up while you were running carries you too far, an embarrassing amount of distance until you finally hit the ground with a massive thud, and I did my best to do a cool roll. I was fine, grazed my palms, but like, that's how this book felt. There will be a moment that will hit you in this novel. It might be a different moment for different readers, where suddenly you feel like you've tripped, and now you're tumbling forward. You will continue to read, you have nothing to grab onto, it's unnerving and frightening, and you don't know if when it gets to the end, you're gonna be okay. That's kind of how it felt. And for a novel to have that feeling, that's really, really cool. So, I wholeheartedly recommend Jeff VanderMeer's Annihilation. And if you're worried about dedicating yourself to a whole trilogy, you really can just read the first one and feel pretty satisfied. And I do also recommend Alex Garland's film as well. This is a short, surreal, beautiful piece of science fiction that could probably be interpreted in a whole bunch of different ways, and I'd like to know your interpretation if you've read it. Now it's time for my Patreon book recommendation of the week. This is a really short recommendation that comes from Yoshe Lindblom, and she simply says, Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield. I just know you will love it. It's such an underrated book. Now, while that is a short recommendation, I am going to take this opportunity to thank Yoshe in particular. She might well have been our first fan. She has been with us following our website from long before there was a YouTube channel. And then as soon as she was able, she became a patron. Yoshe has been an incredible supporter of Books and Bow for years. And I really think she was our first fan. So I just really wanted to take this moment to thank Yoshe in particular for being there with us for so long and for still being a patron. She's absolutely awesome. And I'm really grateful for her recommendation. And I would really appreciate more support on Patreon. I actually lost a bunch of patrons recently. And when you're a really small channel and you need every single penny you can get, you notice when $10 vanishes. So if you're able to, if you love what I do, if you want to recommend books and get them mentioned on the channel, please consider joining my Patreon. The community is absolutely fantastic, and I do my best to nurture a community of bookworms that can spend every single day chatting about books with each other. It's a wonderful, inclusive space, and you can join for just $1 a month, and you can give book recommendations like this one for $5 a month. So please consider supporting my Patreon and subscribe for books.